Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Rival Recon here on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Harry Sethi. Following a disastrous performance away to Brighton last weekend, Klopp finally seemed to respond with a rotated red side picking up a much-needed win away to Wolves in the Cup on Tuesday night. Despite the alterations we've seen, many Liverpool fans will be reserving their judgment as they wait to see whether these changes remain for Chelsea's arrival at Anfield this Saturday. And with both sides in poor form, Saturday's game promises to be an intriguing contest. And joining me on the pod this week to share his insight on what seemed a chaotic season for Chelsea to date, I'm delighted to welcome on Parth, writer, owner and podcaster for the Chelsea Spot. Welcome on, Parth.
Thank you very much for having me on.
No, good to speak with you. It's an interesting one because obviously there's just so much we can talk about when it comes to Chelsea. I mean, I look at the league table, I see where Liverpool are in 9th place, I see where Chelsea are in 10th place, I see the points that they've got over the games that they've played. And it's fair to say that the season has not worked out how I think either fan bases would have hoped or expected, to be honest, so far. I think that's an understatement. But then also I was looking back at the fixture list, and of course sort of both teams were set to meet earlier in the season. Probably would have had a conversation about your expectations and things like that. And now we're so much further into it. But I do want to sort of ask you just to cast your mind back a little bit to the end of last season, and just reading out purely here on paper, finishing third in the Premier League, FA Cup runners-up, EFL runners-up, quarter-finalists of the Champions League, winning the UEFA Super Cup, winning the FIFA Club World Cup, of course. Of course, on paper, you're looking at that. That does not look like a bad season whatsoever. I just wanted to ask you, come the end of last season, what your expectations were. Obviously, the ownership situation was sort of more or less impossible to predict the way in which that escalated. But from a fan's perspective, what were you expecting at the end of last season?
It's really interesting actually the way you say that, because I think when you look at it and sort of how we've been doing in the last few years, I think naturally I would say, I expect top 4. I expect perhaps like a cup trophy to come in. But I think realistically over the last 5-6 years since we last won the league under Antonio Conte, and even then in the season before that with Mourinho and things like that, we've sort of papered over the cracks a lot with our managers and with our transfer business and things like that. And the whole point has been towards short-term success. So it doesn't surprise me at all that the season that we're having so far has come about where things just don't go away. Our squad is getting slightly exposed. I mean, I remember writing an article when Frank Lampard was in charge, and he was top of the league in December, and this is the same season he got sacked a month later. And I wrote an article. Everyone was obviously going on about Chelsea, top of the league. We'd just beaten Leeds, who were playing well, with 3-0 or something at Stamford Bridge at home. And I was like, do we have a big squad? Yeah. Do we have the best squad? Absolutely no way. And I think although we've made signings since then, our squad really hasn't improved. If you look at the signings which we made since then, that includes like Lukaku, look where he is now, and the players we signed in the summer haven't really made an impact on the season as we would have liked. And the only thing I have to say is it does look like Todd has learned a lot from that. And I know that's quite ironic because we've just spent 70 to 100 mil on another player. But from everything you're hearing, from everything which is looking to come out this summer, we're expecting a huge clear out. And he's made it clear to the players that if you're not going to play well, I'm just going to sell you on. And that's sort of the ruthlessness which we haven't seen in the last few seasons. So in that sense, I am looking forward to what's coming up next.
Yeah, and but going into the season, even before, obviously, well, not before, but sort of early in the Todd Boehly era as the owner of the club, in terms of sort of how you were thinking that Tuchel could evolve the side, the areas of the squad that you thought, okay, these are the areas that do need to be invested in. Were you happy with the business that was done at the time? And in terms of sort of what you were thinking Tuchel was going to be doing in terms of helping the side to kick on even further, where were the areas where you thought, so okay, he needs to focus on these areas of the pitch?
Well, the big thing, absolutely, which I think any Chelsea fan would now say, is that we have been needing a midfielder for 4 or 5 years. We haven't replaced really Fabregas or Matic since, and that's the reality. And for some reason,
right. So is that a creative midfielder or sort of a more holding? Because obviously Matic and Fabregas two different
yeah,
types.
Sure. It's definitely more of the holding side. And I mean, Lampard, he made it so clear he wanted Declan Rice. The club didn't agree to that. I think the big thing which we have to realise is Tuchel for some reason didn't want a midfielder, but I mean, it actually makes no sense with what he's doing. So he recognised Kovacic, Jorginho, Kante as his 3 main midfielders. He's gone out and said in pre-season press conferences that, oh, we've got this 3, or maybe we'll look in the market. Oh, Loftus-Cheek could be that 4th midfielder, blah blah blah. But because he played 3 at the back predominantly, he didn't really see Mason Mount as someone who could play in that midfield. Whereas if you play in the 4, you could play him in midfield, and well, that's where he should be playing. He's a number 8. But there was a report, a really reliable one from Matt Law, The Telegraph, who said that it was the club who had signed Zakaria because they recognised we needed that defensive midfielder, and Tuchel didn't even know who Zakaria was when he arrived. So it's things like that where you're like,
are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AIPRO10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
We have been crying for a midfielder out for ages, and it didn't happen. Luckily, Zakaria's turned out to probably be our best midfielder this season, and I imagine the club may be looking at signing him permanently in the summer with the option to buy if he carries on playing well. So yeah, it's definitely the midfield which, sort of has let us down in the last few years, and Zakaria has pretty much saved that and shown that we really do need that sort of defensive sort of midfielder.
And yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of Liverpool fans listening who are like, a manager who didn't realise that the essential midfielder was needed, and then I'm highly doubting that FSG are going to go and just decide to buy Moises Caicedo and go, there you go, Jurgen, play him. I doubt that's going to happen, but as much as I'm sure a large proportion of the fan base would love it to happen, we'll see what happens there with the evolution of that midfield unit. But one thing that's interesting there, and already clear, of course, was the way in which there were disagreements between the manager's perspective on things and then the club's perspective on things, and the club acting outside of the manager's maybe awareness. I'll have to admit, the circumstances around Tuchel's departure, I wasn't really sort of clued into in terms of exactly why he left. I mean, you look at the results and there's nothing there that strikes you immediately as, okay, he needs to go. He's really struggling at that point. So I'm guessing it was more around sort of the discontent and the disagreements behind the scenes. Was that the case in terms of sort of why Tuchel was sort of shown the door?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I had this big discussion today on this, and the thing with Tuchel was that they just had different sort of perspectives in the way they wanted to run the club forwards. I think every Chelsea fan was starting to finally realise that he wasn't sacked due to performance-related things. Because then that would be a bit ridiculous. Todd had to give Tuchel that chance at the beginning. He had to give him, the Aubameyangs, the Koulibaly, the Cucurellas, the Sterlings, because there would have been absolute uproar if you haven't given Thomas Tuchel, the guy who won the Champions League, won us trophies last season, finished 3rd in the Prem. If you don't give him what he wants, there would have been uproar from the fan base. But I think they were absolutely just waiting for him to get a little bit of bad form and then just get their man in Graham Potter, who clearly is their guy and they're going to back for the next few years. But definitely the big thing is the way they looked in the future. If you look at sort of the way Thomas Tuchel sort of handled the pre-season and the youth players, that was completely opposite to the way Bowley wants to do things. For example, he was willing to let Ethan Ampadu go completely permanently, despite him being the best player in our pre-season. Todd Bowley said, no, we're not letting that happen. You can go on loan, but there's no way we're even allowing an option to buy. That got removed really soon. I know Trev's camp really well. Trev was bang on set to leave, told Tuchel, if you're not going to play me, I'm going to leave. Bowley then says, nope, you're not leaving. We're going to make sure you stay. And then eventually, a few months later, he goes and signs a 6-7 year contract. Levi Colwill is one of the best under 21 centre backs in Europe. Just didn't get a look in. Okay, injury didn't help him much in pre-season, but it doesn't take too long to look. He's just played incredibly in 40 games in the Championship for Huddersfield. Tuchel just didn't bother having a look at him and felt we may as well sign Koulibaly for 30 mil. If you look at the Prem game so far, I think Levi's definitely shown a lot more than what Koulibaly's done. So it's things like that where there was just conflict, a lot more than just the results. Okay, a 1-0 loss to Zagreb in the Champions League isn't great, but it wouldn't have been the end of the world. And as you can see, Potter's lost some simple games and nothing's really happened. So I think that does suggest that it wasn't all performance related.
So more about sort of the approach, sort of the promotion of youth. I mean, many people have long talked about the quality of Chelsea's academy, and you rarely saw players making that transition into the first team and getting regular football. So a little bit here and there, often sort of caused by just the situation that the club was in at the time. Your players being injured, there being a need for a player to come in and the academy helping out in that sense. But that's what you're saying there, more around sort of the approach that was going to be taken about promotion of youth, a slightly different sort of philosophy. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely that. I mean, the only manager who's really done it for us was Frank Lampard, and yeah, he got it a little bit forced upon him, the fact that he had a transfer ban, as you said, sort of unforeseen circumstances. But he could have chosen, for example, to play Ross Barkley over Mason Mount. He could have chosen to play Olivier Giroud over Tammy Abraham, things like that. Whereas most other managers have just completely ignored it, don't really think about the long term because they know their line, their job is on the line. And as much as I do, I come from a guy who's really biased towards the academy. I watch them pretty much week in, week out. I do understand from their perspective. They're like, oh, there is a risk playing a 19-year-old. As much as I think they could suit the team really well, I think you'd get that with Harvey Elliott. I think he plays really well for you guys, and he's sometimes the best player on the pitch. But like, I'm always like, if you trust them, if you give them some time, Chelsea Academy is known as one of the best academies in Europe for a reason. They know what they're doing. And as we've seen with Lewis Hall so far this season, the way he's just completely displaced 60 million signing Cucurella from the team, these guys are good enough to do a good enough job for you. And it's just important that you back them, which, as you said, it didn't look like Tuchel was going to do. And that's what Todd wanted.
Yeah, and it's certainly a departure sort of from what we've seen beforehand in terms of many previous managers, Mourinho included them, just not seeming willing to actually give those players a chance. And it's also led to the departure, isn't it, clearly, of a number of sort of really talented academy prospects. I'm just thinking of Tomori from the top of my head. Never really understood why Tomori was allowed to leave rather than develop at the club. And then, of course, he's gone on to have a good career so far in Italy, winning the league with Milan, of course. So it's you don't want to be seeing that with sort of further academy prospects, of course. But we have to turn to transfers because there's a lot of them, right? So we should probably start getting through them. To be honest, I'm just going to read out a list here. Tell me if I miss anybody. But Fofana, Mudryk, of course, who's just joined the club, Cucurella, Raheem Sterling, Badishai, Koulibaly, who else you got? Aubameyang. I mean, I forgot about this. Yao Felix, another big name to sort of mention there as well. Zakaria, as you talked about. I've probably missed some players out there, so do let me know if I have done, especially if they're on the younger side and sort of promising for the future. But a huge amount of business, and I suppose the question I'd ask you is, first of all, what do you make of the business and the signings that have come in? Maybe you can sort of go through a few of them in terms of sort of how you think they fit. And that, my second question is more around that, the fit, in terms of you look at all these players and I'm not sure in my head perhaps just how joined up the thinking seems to be in terms of the approach that you imagine Graham Potter's looking to implement.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I think Todd has made it clear, at least vocally, that the plan is to buy younger players, to buy these guys who are going to play for us in the future. And if they don't, you can sell them on for a profit by buying them cheaper. I think you saw that with signings of Chukwuemeka for 20 mil, Amari Hutchinson we got from Arsenal on a low, Casadei from Italy, for example, who's in our academy. I imagine he's going to go on loan in the next few months. But then you have the other side of it where you've got, we've just bought Koulibaly for 32 mil. He's about 31 years old. Oh, we've bought Sterling for 40, 50 mil. He's about 28, 29, whatever. But that's where I think it came in the sense that we have to back Tuchel a little bit in the beginning, and I really do think Todd would have learned from those mistakes. And from everything which has been reported, which I'm hearing, it looks like even some of the signings in summer could move on. And I think Koulibaly is a massive one who we could just see leave after a season if another club wants him. The problem with this is there going to be another club who wants to pay Koulibaly's wages?
I was going to say, yeah.
This is the problem, and it's going to be interesting to see the way Todd can handle that, because as much as you can say to him, okay, we're not going to play you, so either you leave and you try and lower your wages, or you stick around and you don't play, that creates an unhappy guy in the dressing room, and then we all know what happens with that. It just completely collapses, and who knows what could happen from there. So it's going to be really interesting the way Todd handles it. I think his incentive is good. I'm slightly worried until we have this multi-club system, which he is trying to do. We sort of got a load of players in the same position, especially in midfield, similar ages, young players who don't really know what their plan is. For example, we've signed this Andre Santos, Brazilian, I don't want to say wonder kid, but some 12 million guy from a guy who played in the second league of Brazil division, and Casadei and Chukwuemeka. You've got Lewis Hall, who is a midfielder. You've then Mount and Gallagher are still really young. Loftus-Cheek is still around. So what is the actual plan? I don't know. Until the multi-club model is a brilliant idea, I think, for us, because we have such a good academy. We bring in players for young. We send them out on loan there. If they play well, they're good enough to make our squad. Brilliant. If they don't play that well enough level, you can sell them on for a profit. But until that's made, I think there's a slight worry about where we're heading.
Yeah, sort of the official multi-club model instead of the sort of the unofficial multi-club model of the past with Vitesse. Taking some new players on loan, of course. But of the signings that have been made, I mean, you talked about some of the ones there who are further on in their careers than is the approach now to sign young and then have the resale value. But of the players that have come in since then, which of the signings do you think have shown signs that they could be a success, and which of the signings are sort of most pleased with?
I think we have had successful signings. I mean, obviously the young players we haven't seen much of, so I don't want to speak too much on them. And you're sort of expecting it from the future. I think Raheem Sterling, as much as people are making out the fact that he's on not ridiculous wages, but he is very high wages because he was one of the best players in the country at a point, an England international. He is still, I think, can offer a lot to this team. I do generally believe that, because he is a player who sort of succeeds with top players around him. He doesn't really have that at Chelsea at the moment, to be totally honest. And there's a massive difference when Reece James is playing behind him and when Azpilicueta is playing behind him. And that's something which I'm sure we'll talk about when we're talking about the Liverpool game coming up this weekend and the difference that could bring. But I think Raheem Sterling will be a successful signing, because I think 50 mil, and he's actually not been that bad for us this season as people are making out. Cucurella is an interesting one. I wasn't a huge fan of the signing, but he's been okay, and I imagine he will stay because he has been signed for a massive fee. He's still 24, and he's not an awful left back. He does the job. I'm a massive fan of Fofana, the centre back that is Fofana. I don't know about this new signing, Datro Fofana up front we signed, but Wesley Fofana at centre back. As much as, again, 80 mil is a lot of money, it fits right in with where the club are heading towards. In fact, that he's only 21. He is a bit injury prone, so hopefully he sorts that out. But again, that's one I think no doubt he's going to be a top centre back in a few years' time. So that is the signings which sort of make sense. But then, of course, you do have the ones I was talking about which make zero sense, such as Aubameyang, which is just a.
Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own two-footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin De Vries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ridiculous signing when you think about it. A 33-year-old for 12 mil, and now he could be heading back to Barcelona if, the law allows him to.
Yeah.
So it's been a bit of a mess, but I think all in all, positive, definitely more than negative.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about João Felix as well, which is, I think that's one that strikes me. I mean, I think he's a good player. I think he's a very talented player who probably did need a fresh start, to be honest, in terms of sort of realising the most of his talent. But the way in which things have started, I'm sure there's tons of headlines in there about the potential cost per game now because it's a loan deal. But moving away from sort of the transfer just for a second, I'm sure we'll come back to talk about individual players, but the appointment of Graham Potter then, of course, this decision's made to part ways with Tuchel, and Graham Potter, who had done really good work, really solid work at Brighton, work which I think now, if we're fair about it, De Zerbi, as well as taking Brighton on from that point and developing them even more, is obviously benefiting from that foundational work that Potter had done there. A promising coach, British coach, and being given an opportunity like that. Not seen very often, of course. What were your thoughts when the appointment was initially made? And I suppose, what did you think of his first sort of opening stretch of games before we get into some of the recent struggles?
Yeah, I to be totally honest, I watched Brighton a lot and I absolutely loved him as a manager. And that's a massive reason for why I was like, okay, if you can sack Thomas Tuchel and get Graham Potter in, then you do so. Because I was a massive fan of his football, his recruitment team, which he's brought along with him, have been absolutely wonderful at Brighton. I mean, you can see with the way I mean, Cucurella is a perfect example of that. They probably bought him for 5-10 million and sold him on for 60. They do these things on a regular. Caicedo's been linked with a 70-80 million move away. They probably bought him again for 10-20. So it's things like that where it's like, okay, there's clearly aligns with what Todd's trying to do. Let's bring him in. Let's actually, I don't really like this phrase, but let's try and trust the process. I would have been more than happy to trust the process with like another manager, but it didn't look like they wanted to do that. So that's why I thought Potter was a brilliant arrival. And yeah, his first few games, it's interesting because after a few, I actually tweeted saying, when do you know whether it's a manager bounce or whether he's actually massively improved the squad? And I think we sort of went 8 games unbeaten or something. We won loads of games in the Prem. We smashed Milan in the Champions League. And it was like, okay, we are playing really well, but how much of it is actually that the players want to impress him and stick around? And because that has been a problem with Chelsea, it's like, as soon as you sack a manager, the players got what they wanted and all of a sudden they can impress the new one. That's the main reason why we won the Champions League just 2 years ago, because Lampard was sacked halfway through. But I had a feeling that we actually weren't playing too differently to the way Tuchel was playing. And that's something I noticed really early on. I was like, okay, they're just putting in more effort, and that's why we're winning games. And as you can see, as we'll get on to, the last few games, the effort has completely gone, and that's why we've been in utter shambles.
Yeah, you're asking sort of how long before you'd know the answer. Late October was basically the cut-off point, and we'll talk about some of the turning point. I mean, the turning point fixture when you read on paper, obviously, does look to be, I mean, almost very romantically, that 4-1 loss to Brighton. When you look at sort of when the results, some of the draws before then, but sort of 3 consecutive losses from that point. You mentioned you watched a lot of Potter at Brighton. Were a big fan of what he'd done there. I think lots was made of the style that Potter was implementing there, and I think very often I came away from watching Brighton games being incredibly impressed by just how well coached the teams looked, how clear on their roles, responsibilities, that they looked very well drilled, of course. And then in the end, it did seem to be a side underperforming their XG, but also just missing that little bit of quality in the final third to make the difference and actually those games that they largely dominated against quite a few of the bigger sides actually come away with the win. And what's interesting now is I wouldn't say they've got huge amounts of more quality in an attacking sense under De Zerbi, but the slight tweak in the way in which they're playing has enabled them to score more goals. They're taking a few more risks. They're letting in a few more, of course. But that was Potter's style. There was a huge focus on control in games. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a million miles away from what Tuchel wanted to sort of create with his teams as well. Just in terms of what you've noticed from Potter, you mentioned in the first few games, not too much changed, but what tweaks, what tactical sort of switches and changes, maybe trust in personnel that wasn't there before, have you seen from Graham Potter the more he's gotten settled?
Well, I think at the beginning, the main thing generally was just moving Mason Mount a little bit deeper. And I'm not going to say as if that solved all problems. And I have to say, Mason has been, I'm one of Mason's biggest fans. He's been potentially one of our worst 5 performers this season. He's been that bad. I don't know what's actually happened in that sense. I obviously get back into it, but we have always sort of relied on Mason Mount to do something in the last few years, and he's got chucked in these ridiculous roles. He's like highest player on the pitch at a point, and you're like, this is a guy who is a number 8 quite clearly, and he's being asked to do some crazy things because he has the ability to just put the ball in the back of the net. So I think he moved Mason deeper. He sort of changed Sterling's role, and that was a massive thing at the beginning. I remember Tuchel sort of had him playing sometimes in the midfield, sometimes up front, whereas the very first game, Sterling sort of had that left wing back role, except he was getting the ball so high up the pitch and actually being able to create something, and we saw more of the England Sterling than you see from the Man City Sterling. The Man City Sterling is sort of, he's at the back post tapping it in, he's trying to link up with the right back. Whereas the Sterling for England that I see is the one, he's trying to make something happen. He's, trying to be that star player. And that's sort of the early things I saw from Potter. But overall, the way we were playing, it wasn't too dissimilar. But I think as time has gone on since, you are starting to see the style of play Potter is trying to get at. It's just obviously the results haven't helped that. And you do wonder to yourself as a manager, as you naturally would. You'll be like, is this really working? Things like that. And I think it's just important he sticks to what he knows and what he does best, which was some incredible football at Brighton.
Yeah, I think there's naturally sort of things that are going to be labelled against Potter in the position that he's in. Is obviously he hasn't previously had to tackle a task like this, working with this caliber of player, for example, and trying to get them to buy into his methods. One thing we usually do on this pod as well is just pinpoint games in the season that you think illustrate. Maybe pick a game that you want to under Potter where you think this illustrates what Chelsea look like when everything sort of clicks and sort of they play in the style in which he would want them to. And what's a good example of a game? There's a couple options here of when everything hasn't clicked. An example of some of the problems that Potter's tackling.
Yeah, there was this early stage, I remember, we beat Milan 3-0, we beat Wolves 3-0, and straight after we beat Milan away at the San Siro 2-0. And those were the games I was like, wow, Potter is really, really impacted this team. I remember that Wolves game, I was at the Bridge, and it was just incredible. We sort of had Gallagher and Mount playing as 8s, and they completely ruined it, well, as in ruined the other team. Azpilicueta at right back, who I will talk about later when I'm saying Liverpool could absolutely destroy him. But he somehow just had the most incredible game I've seen in years from him, and that completely changed the way we play. So those are the sort of games on the positive side. I was like, okay, you can really see the difference which Potter's trying to make here. And then you had those negative games. That the one against Arsenal, the 1-0 springs to mind, where we didn't play awfully, but we just looked so unbothered, and we just didn't look like we were trying at all. That Brighton 4-1 loss obviously wasn't brilliant. So that then people will make a lot of the sort of City and the way we played them 3 times in the space in a few weeks and lost all 3. 4-0, is always going to be an embarrassing loss. So I think it's been a lot of ups and downs, and yeah, it's not been easy. But in some games you've seen things he's trying to do, in some games you haven't. So I think it's important that he, as I said before, sticks to what he's trying to do. The players have to back what Potter is doing, because previously, a few years, we've seen as soon as the players don't like what the manager's doing, just tell Roman, tell the board, and he's off and gone and sacked. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So it's it's pretty necessary that Potter sticks with what he's got.
Yeah, and I was going to say about that. I mean, I think whenever you look back at sort of a fixture list, and there's 5 losses in the last 8 games in previous eras of Chelsea, that's spelled trouble for the manager. But you sounds like you're pretty confident there in terms of the stability that Potter has and the trust that Bowley has. I mean, does everybody get the impression that that's the same way for the fans as well?
It's interesting. I think there are still some fans, at least online, who have this perception that Tuchel was sacked due to performances and therefore Potter should be sacked due to performance because he's, as you said, lost 5, 6, 7 games in a row or something like that. And obviously the club didn't get a great impression. They didn't make a great impression of themselves when you had. I know we were losing 4-0 to City away, but we're chanting Roman Abramovich's name and Thomas Tuchel's name, and it's loud and clear on BBC One, shown to millions. But I think, in general, people do realise the direction which Potter and Todd Bowley are trying to go into, and that was sort of a thing where, we're 4-0 down, let's just take the piss a little bit and have a little bit of fun. But, it was a bit annoying to see. I'm sure it would have hurt Potter a little bit. And there was, before this game against Crystal Palace on the weekend where we won 1-0, I was like, if we lose, some of the fans, especially the match-going ones, are going to absolutely lose their head. And I do wonder if Todd has sort of the bollocks to stick with it.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll never know, because thankfully we did win 1-0. And I mean, deep down I'm thinking, okay, no, he's just no way he's sacking Potter. But I did speak to a few, and they're like, if the fan reaction is so bad, he's absolutely going to have to take that into account to at least some extent. Again, he probably wouldn't have sacked him, but you never know with these things. But I guess we won 1-0, and even, we could go on a few losses again. I just don't think Potter's going, at least until he's had 1 or 2 windows.
I think what's interesting about it as well is that as well as it being a transition point for the club in terms of the philosophy that they're taking with promotion of young players, different sort of tactical approach as well. I think there's going to be a period of transition for the fans as well, as I imagine, because it does seem as well, as you would expect with any fan base who's gone through this, right, that the fans have become a little bit accustomed to that sort of changing as well, right, when results aren't going well and the players don't look like they're buying in necessarily to the philosophy the manager's trying to get across. The fans are going to get disgruntled, and then very often that's resulted in a manager disappearing from the Chelsea dugout and a new one appearing quite soon afterwards. Fans not getting their way necessarily, let's say, in that situation, if they were to turn on Potter, perhaps there actually needs to be that period of realization that Chelsea are no longer going to be run in that way a little bit. I almost worry that if Bowley was to give in to some of that pressure, then you're just back in the cycle that you've always been in, right?
100%. I don't think I could have said that any better.
Okay.
The fans absolutely need to change as well. As you said, we've just been used to sacking a manager every 2 years, winning a trophy here and there, but it's the main reason we haven't won a title in 7 years or something like that. I mean, I don't want to constantly compare, but if you look at Arsenal around last year, everyone wanted Arteta to go, and they're now top of the league. They're loving life, and if anything, they're set to win it if they don't muck it up themselves. So it's important to look at that and see. Okay, I'm not going to say it's the exact same, and I do think we have a better squad than what they had last sort of season, and we should be doing better than we are. But if you sort of trust what the manager's going to do, if you sort of sign signings to help your squad dynamic and things on the pitch, then you're going to head in the right direction. And if the way City and, don't mind me saying, Liverpool are going downwards at the moment, I think that the club will definitely sense an opportunity to sort of grow in the next few years and really, really excel.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, I think. Yeah, something about Liverpool. I mean, the impression I've got of this Liverpool side, to be honest, is that there's actually probably not a huge amount wrong, but there's just a section of the pitch that they've neglected to transition to sort of the next generation. I mean, love Harvelia, as you mentioned him earlier on, but the guy's a winger, as is Carvalho. And the options in midfield are, I know you were talking about it at the start of the pod, but for Liverpool, there needs to be quite a lot of surgery in that midfield. Other than that, I'm quietly not too unhappy with the options. I think there's some players out injured as well, but yeah, I think Klopp's in a similar position. I think at the moment of relative stability, it feels like there's, I think, apart from the usual sort of Twitter mob that you'll find from time to time, I don't think anyone's genuinely saying Klopp out by any stretch of the imagination. I think they're more curious about the fact that Klopp's never really gone through a rebuild like this. So this is going to be interesting to see how he does it, especially with combined with the departure of some of the more noted members of the scouting department, shall we say. But in terms of the expectations for the season ahead, then I mean it's difficult to sort of to know where things would go from this point, or whether it's going to be a season of inconsistency for the club. I mean, currently obviously sat in 10th place, level on points of Liverpool, having played a game more. But I mean, what are your expectations for the remainder of the season? And at this point, I mean, where do you think Chelsea will end up finishing?
I think we'll finish around the 6th to 8th place, something like that.
Okay.
I think the big thing we do have is players coming back from injury now, really important ones. Reece James is a massive, I mean, he changes our team completely. It is ridiculous, which I will talk about actually when I want to see from Potter in the next few months. But Reece James coming back, Fofana coming back, Loftus-Cheek and Chilwell, and sort of these good players who have shown what they can do for us in the last few years. But the thing I want to see from Potter, more than anything, I couldn't care less, honestly, if he finished 14th and this happened, was that he takes more risks with the starting lineups. And I mean that in the sense that start players who are actually going to be here for you in the next few years. Don't start players who are going to leave in the summer. So, for example, Jorginho his contract is running out this summer. You've got Carney Chukwuemeka, a top player, just sitting on the bench, and you're like, why are we playing Jorginho over Chukwuemeka if you know you're going to get that backing from Bowley? So previous managers, if they started Jorginho over Chukwuemeka, I'm like, fine, you can probably get sacked in about 5 games time if it costs you. Whereas with Potter, it's like, okay, you know you're going to get that backing, you've got that time, so let's start thinking about the future a little bit. This massive problem I've had with him in the last month, probably my only problem with Potter in general, is this situation we've had at right back and right wing back.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac, and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, mag boxes, and games consoles. Visit LibertyShield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
The problem with our squad is when you go from Reece James to our next player in Azpilicueta, the level in drop-off is honestly ridiculous. I was thinking this today. I don't think Azpilicueta starts for another Premier League club, and he's sort of here because of his status, which is a legend. And I don't watch Liverpool that much, but it's sort of get that vibes with Jordan Henderson.
Right.
But there's this academy player, this right wing back, who is would fit the squad like a gem. And his name is Dion Rankin, if anyone's interested. I know his contract runs out this summer. He is expected to leave. But you've seen the way Lewis Hall has transformed our team at left wing back. Why not just throw in Dion Rankin at right wing back for a game and see what happens? He didn't even get a chance. And the biggest problem came in the Champions League game against Zagreb. We had finished top of the group stage. There were 4 spots left on the academy bench. On the bench of the game. There were 4 just empty spots, and not a single academy player was called up. And I think it's like those sort of games. You're like, well, why aren't you thinking for the future? I mean, it makes no sense, and it's sort of things I absolutely criticise Tuchel for. So it's only right that I do it for Potter. So I'd just like to see a few more risks taken, and just thinking about the future a bit more.
Yeah, no, I think it's, again, when managers are going through tough periods of time, it's not always surprising to see them, even managers you think are beyond it, to be honest, or above it, turning back to experience, just looking at sort of the number of appearances, looking at the age of those players and going, I'm going to put these guys through it rather than expose younger players to it. But I think, as you pointed out, there sometimes it comes at the detriment to the team. It's something that definitely a similarity with Liverpool there in terms of, you mentioned Jordan Henderson as a player who's clearly been sort of very below par this season, and yet has played game in, game out. Only in the FA Cup game last night, where he wasn't part of the squad, we see a more compact midfield, by no means the level that we're hoping for perhaps moving forward, but a much improved midfield. The test, I suppose, will be in that lineup against Chelsea. Does Klopp revert to Fabinho and Henderson, who've struggled this season? Henderson more so, for example, or is he actually going to make that change, as he said he would, with sort of going with meritocracy? I think that's a little bit what you're talking about there, around sort of just wanting to see those players who play better and are younger get a chance. The players who are going to be there next season, as you say. Yeah, I think that's definitely been a similarity. But again, a very experienced manager. Managers won everything, turning to experience in those moments. That's what we've seen so far from Klopp as well. So it seems to happen to the best of them. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether there's a turning point for both of them. Just before we get into the actual game itself, I just wanted to ask, are there particular players who maybe Liverpool fans wouldn't have had too much awareness of, but are getting a look in now, or even some of the new signings that you think that have been some of the unsung heroes, the ones who've gone a little bit under the radar, that need to be sort of paid more attention to?
Lewis Hall is certainly the big one. He is a midfielder currently playing at left back for us, and he has, as I said before, completely displaced Cucurella from the team. He missed training today, actually, but he will be back tomorrow, I've been told. So hopefully, he picked up a knock in the Palace game, but he'll be absolutely fine, hopefully, for the Liverpool game. Badiashile had a really impressive game against Crystal Palace in his debut, and he is sort of made, it sort of makes you wonder what on earth has Koulibaly been up to in the last few months. But I only know it's been one game, and he did have a shaky first 15 minutes positioning wise, but it looked like he got used to it really soon, and that was really encouraging. Other than that, there isn't much to look out for. We sort of just, with the injuries we have, we sort of got our normal lineup of Kovacic, Jorginho, Azpilicueta, Thiago Silva, Mason Mount, Kai Havertz, and then Ziyech or someone like that. So I'd say Lewis Hall and Badiashile are 2 players who probably will start against Liverpool and who you may not know too much about.
And then moving on to that game, then I suppose both clubs in tricky spots. Chelsea obviously picked up that important win against Palace. Liverpool, I think, picked up what actually feels like it was quite an important win if it leads to the changes that we're hoping for. That win against Wolves last night in the replay in the FA Cup. It does feel like both clubs are at sort of an interesting turning point in terms of sort of how their managers look to approach the remainder of the season. How are you expecting Potter to approach this game? He had lots of success against Liverpool as Brighton manager. And this is certainly a more sort of beleaguered version of Liverpool. It does look as though, hopefully, chaos agent Darwin Núñez will be back. So that's promising for sort of the early kickoff as well, that he probably do something ridiculous and hopefully score. But in terms of what you're expecting from in Potter's approach to a game like that away at Anfield, but in this sort of period where Liverpool are diminished a little bit, how are you expecting him to approach it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, so at Brighton, he's sort of, you expect Liverpool to dominate Brighton, therefore he was able to do his thing in terms of playing good football, playing on the counter and sort of dominating it in that sense. Whereas when you're at Chelsea, the expectations are slightly different. You're like, oh, Chelsea need to go and try there and actually properly go for the win in terms of they need to try and play good football, they need to play out the back, they need to keep a high line, keep an interesting game and things like that. So that's going to be really interesting. I think the big thing is this is the first time Potter has had a full week of training with the full squad set of players. So it's not an international break for around, I think, since September, something like that. So it's going to be really interesting to see, the way if he can implement some sort of tactical adjustments, which he probably hasn't been able to do in the last few months because we're playing every 3 days and 1 day of that is recovery. So it'll be fascinating to see the way he sets up. A lot of it is going to rely on Reece's fitness. He's been out on the pitch doing recovery now for around a week. So is he going to take that risk? I hope not, to be totally honest, because that's what happened last time, and he got injured pretty much the next game, and sent him out for a further month. And Chilwell won't be back. Loftus-Cheek will probably make the bench. And then I guess the other big thing, which I think the whole world will be wanting to see, is Mudryk going to play? He hasn't played since November, any football, because of the winter break. But with Pulisic out, with Sterling, I think, who's probably out as well, you're like, what's the worst could happen if you just chucked him in the team? And I think a lot of people are going to make out the fact is Mudryk a 1v1 winger against Trent. A lot of people are going to be interested to see that happens. He's definitely not fit enough to play 90 minutes, but if you chuck him in the start, play him 60, see what can happen. It'll be interesting to see if that works. And I haven't watched much of him, and I don't think many people have, but he seems to have this sort of really athletic sort of character. He's really big and he's really quick, and that could cause problems to the Liverpool sort of midfield and defence. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the way Parth sets up.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key, because I think, as you mentioned there, Liverpool this season have largely been struggling with teams adopting a tactical approach, which is what Liverpool used to do to hurt them, to hurt their opponents. To be honest, I mean, they've struggled in transition. They looked really vulnerable to it. Really, the vast majority of games this season haven't looked to change their approach to cater for some of the limitations of the players that have been starting. And it's only now that we're seeing sort of rotation in that midfield, and perhaps sort of the inclusion of players who will prevent Trent from being in sort of 1v1 situations with wingers, because obviously he's going to be leaving space given sort of the creative impact he has. So it's going to be interesting to see if Klopp does go with that changed midfield. Will we actually see the right side of midfielder going back, helping Trent out and not just leaving him exposed? And also, if it's going to be him versus Mudryk, that's going to be a very exciting, certainly a very exciting battle, actually, in terms of both of their styles. It's an interesting one in terms of, for the remainder of the season. You've already sort of spoken about your expectations there, and you spoke about what you want to see from Potter. One question I didn't ask there was just sort of how Potter's handled the job off the pitch. I mean, I think that's sort of an aspect of being a Chelsea manager that used to come under a lot of scrutiny, probably come under less scrutiny in some ways now than it did beforehand under Abramovich. But this is a big opportunity for him, but it's also a challenge. How do you think he's handled that side of the job?
Yeah, this is sort of links back to the point where Chelsea fans need to change a bit. He's sort of, I mean, if you know Potter, you know the way he's going to be. He's going to, answer questions honestly. He's going to be perhaps a bit blunt, as people say, and not be that active on the touchline. Whereas we've been used to Thomas Tuchel, Antonio Conte, Frank Lampard, Jose Mourinho, characters like these, where they're going bonkers. They're sort of giving the aggression you want in the press conferences to sort of fire up the players. Whereas Potter's just a completely different style, and fans have to, get used to that. I mean, a lot gets made of Potter's sort of emotional intelligence and sort of the degree he did and things like that. I mean, it's hard for us to tell how that's going on with the players. He seems to have a really good relationship with them. And I think that's important in that sense. And the big thing is he's getting off the pitch. He's getting on really well with Bowley. He's having a say in signings, which is something we haven't seen happen at all in the last few years. And there's that communication, which wasn't a thing under Tuchel at all, between, sort of the uppers and, well, between Bowley and Tuchel, and then between Lampard and Marina, for example, that really died down. So I think, obviously we've spoken about on the pitch, but off the pitch, he's sort of just, he's done what he's known to do. And I think that's important, and it's the reason why Todd signed him. And as long as that continues, then we'll be all right.
So if I was to put you on the spot then, I mean, what type of game are you expecting this weekend? Early kickoff, sort of unknown a little bit what both teams are going to be like. Actually, there's one question that Liverpool listeners would not forgive me for not asking ahead of a Liverpool-Chelsea game. Please tell me, Kante is not available, is he?
Kante is not available.
Thank God,
no, he's not.
Just for once. It's every single season that has been the question.
Right, he's just come back just in time.
He's always been back. I mean, I know he's gone through his sort of his own journey at Chelsea in terms of sort of the way fans maybe view him these days, but he always seemed to make his way back to this fixture, and always used to put in him and Kovacic especially incredible performances. So he's unavailable this weekend.
He is unavailable, so is Zakaria. So I imagine it will just be Jorginho and Kovacic, which I think...
Interesting, okay.
Yeah, which perhaps, could combat your midfield and being one of the weakest midfielders around. So so that will be interesting, but yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's going to be interesting, yeah. I mean, I'm hoping for... I mean, youngster Stefan Bajcetic last night was impressive, but you don't know how a midfielder like that would do in a game against two very experienced opponents there in the Chelsea midfield. I mean, there's no lack of sort of cynicism in those two as well. They're two very clever operators. Naby Keita, I mean, I've never had an issue with him apart from the fact that he's just not been there as much as I would have liked. And that third one, if it's going to be as it was last night, I mean, Thiago Alcantara starts when he's fit. Will we see Henderson come back in? Will we see Fabinho come back in? Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. But I'm expecting a fairly frenetic game, to be honest, and that's also why I'm hoping for the inclusion of Nunez as well. But anyway, Parth, I mean, thanks so much. There, we've covered a lot, I think, in that time in terms of the move from Tuchel, the move from Abramovich to Bowley, the different approach, the mindset change for the players, the coach, and the fans. I think it's going to be a really interesting remainder of the season. Thanks again so much for coming on and sharing your insight.
No worries. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed talking about Chelsea this season. It's a change from what it's been, but it's been good.
Yeah. Is there also, just wanted to invite you as well, is there anything that you want to plug as well before you do go?
I mean, if you're interested in sort of following Chelsea, do follow my account, the Chelsea Spot. But other than that, I don't think it'll be that helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd be surprised. But I think given where Liverpool fans' mindsets is at the moment, we'll have to see. But again, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. Then also to all the listeners who've obviously been joining me on these Rival Recon pods this season, you'll be happy to know there'll be another one coming. There's a bit of deja vu actually over the next few game days, because Liverpool, as you know, that would have seen it going back to Brighton, which is, I'm sure that's going to be fun for us again, in the FA Cup. So there's a chance for revenge, or just a chance for repetition. We'll see. And then also going back to Wolves for the next game in the Premier League. Well, we'll be doing a pod ahead of that one on the 4th of Feb. So do join us for another episode of Rival Recon ahead of that game. But between now and then, check out all the great content on Anfield Index Pro. Some really good analysis at the moment into sort of the areas where Liverpool have struggled this season. I think Brighton, hopefully, let's say the Brighton defeat was the nadir, and there's some been home truths accepted now. But do check out all the other great content on the channel, and we'll be back again ahead of that game against Wolves on the 4th of Feb.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at anfieldindex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.